Eileen Wellsome, an investigative reporter, revealed the identities of 18 people who were injected with plutonium without their knowledge or consent by doctors and scientists. According to her investigation, they were subjected to secret human radiation experiments conducted by the U.S. government throughout the 1940s and 1950s. She published her findings to the Albuquerque Tribune in 1993 and 6 years later published the Plutonium Files, American Secret Medical Experiments in the Cold War. As a result of this, the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments was brought into fruition in 1995 by President Clinton. The committee analyzed the ethics of the experiments and established policies and regulations to avoid the involvement of human subjects in future scientific research. Additionally, the committee uncovered events and procedures that happened within the experiments in detail, backed up by evidence and witnesses. The Advisory Committee addressed their intentions with these experiments, which mainly involved the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was a secret government program during World War II that's goal was to develop atomic weapons before Nazi Germany. This meant project workers who were in charge of building bombs were led to becoming exposed to plutonium and uranium. However, scientists had little to no knowledge on the effects of these radioactive elements or how to treat it. Therefore, in 1942, Dr. Stafford Warren, a radiologist, was hired as the chief medical officer of the Manhattan Engineer District to have a better understanding of the unknown risks and dangers of the radioactive materials and develop methods to treat it. He gathered a medical team by 1944, led by him, that determined it was necessary to use human specimens in controlled experiments. At the start of the Cold War, the procedures within these experiments sparked controversy between Manhattan Project scientists, but it was kept under secrecy. According to the Advisory Committee, doctors and scientists strictly kept these experiments hidden by the public in fear of their reaction and to avoid lawsuits. Therefore, they never made patients aware that they were being injected with radioactive substances. Some doctors themselves didn't even know the contents of these injections either. However, they justified this by purposely misdiagnosing patients with terminal illnesses when instead they put them at a higher risk of developing cancer in the span of 10 to 20 years, although some patients who were not at risk of this had a greater chance of dying in the future. The experiments were all held in hospitals that were associated with the Manhattan Project, those being in Rochester, New York, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Chicago, Illinois, and San Francisco, California. The samples taken by patients who were given plutonium injections were sent to labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to be analyzed by a biochemical team led by Dr. Wright Lingham. At a hospital in the University of California where human experiments were held, Elmer Allen, a 36-year-old patient, was diagnosed with bone cancer and had his left leg amputated shortly after receiving a plutonium injection. Two physicians claimed in a note on his medical chart that he fully agreed to the procedures within the experiment. The note was meant as a way to meet requirements under conditions to conduct human experimentations. This implies that they were only allowed to proceed if the clinical tests could provide therapeutic effects and if the patient was informed and given documented consent. However, none of these requirements were actually met. The note did not make it clear that Allen was fully aware of the actual effects from the procedures, since the injection was not expected to provide the therapeutic effects that were promised, meaning no real consent was given. The daughter of Allen, Elmarine Whitfield Bell, told the Advisory Committee in Washington, D.C., that she continues to be appalled by the apparent attempts at cover-ups, the interferences that the nature of the times, the 1940s, allowed scientists to conduct experiments without getting a patient's consent or without mentioning risks. We contend that my father was not an informed participant in the plutonium experiment. He was asked to sign his name several times while a patient at the University of California Hospital in San Francisco. Why was he not asked to sign his name permitting scientists to inject him with plutonium? Why was his wife, who was college-trained, not consulted in this matter? Families and mainly victims themselves never received proper justice in the aftermath. According to the Advisory Committee under a section called Secrecy and Public Trust, they state, in a few instances, people used as experimental subjects and their families were denied the opportunity to pursue redress for possible wrongdoing because of actions taken by the government to keep the truth from them. Where programs were legitimately kept secret for national security reasons, the government often did not create or maintain adequate records, thereby preventing the public and those most at risk from learning the facts in a timely and complete fashion. This just sounds like this was done on purpose only to avoid the public from knowing the full scope of the experiments and holding them accountable for it. The least they did was give families of the victims money after they had already passed away decades ago, then just called it a day. Ultimately, this put a lot of distrust in American civilians towards their government after the experiments were revealed to the public. And to make matters worse, these plutonium experiments were just one of the many unethical tests the U.S. had kept in secret. The advisory committee states that the government carried out non-therapeutic research on children involving radioisotopes, irradiated residents of Marshall Islands in a hydrogen bomb test, released radiation into the environment for research purposes, and exposed uranium miners to high levels of radioactivity, leading to the deaths of several hundred from lung cancer. Overall, the human experiments left a long-term legacy on the U.S. during the Cold War and their approach in biomedical research. And according to Eileen Wellstrom, she stated in an interview that some medical establishments today defend these experiments and classify them as important, which isn't concerning at all.